Hi, good afternoon. I think that we've gotten the go ahead to get started because the music has been silenced. Um, my name is Zarina Mustafa. I am a 3L at Harvard Law School, a native of Portland, Oregon, and a graduate of Spelman College. Thank you all so much for joining us for this discussion about the role of lawyers and law students in advancing racial equity. At Harvard, I serve in several roles within the Harvard Black Law Students Association, the American Constitution Society, and beyond. Currently, I serve as the president of the American Constitution Society, the largest progressive student organization on campus, and I'm honored to be moderating this panel today with our wonderful and fantastic panelists. And so without further ado, I will introduce them. First, I am going to introduce Lanita K. Baker, who is the president-elect of the National Bar Association. She serves as Associate Corporate Counsel for Waystar Medical Technologies. And following a notable career in personal injury litigation, Attorney Baker began her legal career at the Louisville Metro Public Defender Corporation. In 2020, Attorney Baker gained national attention in her representation of the family of Breonna Taylor. This was one of the pivotal points in Attorney Baker's career, resulting in a groundbreaking settlement with the city of Louisville, which included terms of police reform, in addition to one of the largest financial awards for an individual civil rights case to date. Attorney Baker graduated from the University of Louisville in 2003 with the Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology and a minor in sociology and a minor in Pan-African studies. She continued her studies at the University of Louisville at the Louis D. Brandeis School of Law, obtaining her Juris Doctorate in 2006. In 2017, she obtained a master's in business administration with distinction from the University of Louisville College of Business. Attorney Baker has shown her commitment to the legal community consistently throughout her career. She is the current president-elect of the National Bar Association, after previously serving as vice president, member at large, chief of staff, and chief of communications. Attorney Baker has also served the Louisville legal community by serving on the board of directors for the Louisville Bar Association, and as an adjunct professor at the University of Louisville Brandeis School of Law. She is also the lead attorney for the Louisville Urban League Riley Reentry Expungement Program. Attorney Baker has received several awards for her service to the legal profession, including being named top 40 under 40 attorney by the National Bar Association in 2015 and the National Black Trial Lawyers in 2017, receiving 4 presidential awards from the National Bar Association, and being named the 2019 Justice Award recipient from the Louisville Urban League. Attorney Baker is a proud member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Y'all, we have a wonderful heavy hitter on this panel, clearly. And our next heavy hitter is Angela Adams. So Angela has served as a federal prosecutor for the past 6 years, 2 years as a trial attorney in the fraud section of the criminal division of the U.S. Department of Justice, and currently as an assistant United States attorney in the Northern District of Georgia. She's going to talk a little bit more about what that work entails later on the panel. Prior to becoming a federal prosecutor, Angela worked as a judicial law clerk for federal judge Clarence Cooper, where she garnered the invaluable experience to be successful as a federal prosecutor. She worked at Austin & Bird, LLP, as an associate and senior associate for 7 years with Austin & Bird after graduating from law school. In addition to prosecuting cases, Angela enjoys mentoring junior lawyers and supervising third-year law students. Y'all hear that? Keep that in mind. Angela graduated magna cum laude from Clark Atlanta University in Atlanta, Georgia, and received her Juris Doctorate from Howard University in Washington, D.C. We have a double HBCU here. We love to see it. And last, but certainly not least, we have Ashley Taylor. And Ashley Taylor is our recent graduate on the panel. Ashley Taylor is a fellow at the Federal Public Defender's Office in the District of Oregon. I'm from Portland, Oregon, so I'm with you. She is a 2021 graduate of Columbia Law School and completed her undergraduate degree at The Ohio State University. So y'all, please silent clap for our wonderful panelists. Or y'all can clap out loud if you like. We'll be interactive today. So we're just going to jump right into the questions. So as you all know, This is a panel about advancing racial equity and the role of lawyers and law students in this endeavor. So I want to know from each of you, what does advancing racial equity look like to you in general or in your respective fields of work? And let's go ahead and get started with Ashley.
Sure. I'm very happy to be here. I feel very, imposter syndrome isn't real, but, my bio was much shorter than the other two panelists, but I'll give it a go. I think in, my line of work as a federal public defender, I think doing my job to the best of my ability is how I try to advance racial equity. Any Black person or a person of color who isn't warehoused in a cell for some amount of time or whose sentence is lower is one step towards racial equality. Right now, 5 times as many Black people are incarcerated as white Americans in this country, and that's uncountable years of wasted potential, not to mention the effect that institutionalizing someone has on someone and their children, their family, and their community. So I think any reduction in that allows them to advance whatever they personally have in mind in their life, and that's what motivates me to do this work. So.
Wonderful. Thank you for your work. It's so important. And yes, next we'll go with Angela.
Hi there, everyone. First, I just want to say, Ms. Taylor, Ashley, we are so delighted that you are here. Please do not have any sort of imposter syndrome. You are as worthy to be here as anyone else here. So I just want to say that I'm honored to be here with you, okay? So just by way of background, and I'm going to go a little bit step by step here because I am an AUSA, an Assistant United States Attorney, otherwise known as a federal prosecutor, or an AUSA. And I'm just going to explain a little bit about what that is, simply because when I was in law school, I had no idea that what an AUSA was, what a federal prosecutor was, or that it even existed, okay? And I think I need to do that before I can get into the racial equality part. So as a federal prosecutor, what we do is prosecute crimes that have some sort of federal jurisdiction or federal nexus. Particularly, what I have done is prosecuted primarily white collar crimes. So what that means and what that looks like for me is prosecuting crimes or individuals who have committed crimes related to healthcare fraud, wire fraud, bank fraud, embezzlement, any sort of fraud scams that we see and hear about on a daily basis that have a federal nexus. That is what I do. So I prosecute those types of crimes. With respect to your question about racial equality in the work, first, I just have to say that being a Black prosecutor in itself comes with all types of nuances with respect to racial equality. Before a case even gets to Ashley Taylor, who is usually on the other side of my cases, the Federal Defenders Program, somebody has already determined, right, that a crime has been committed. Somebody has already made charging decisions with respect to what charges are going to be lodged against an individual, whether there's some room for pretrial diversion or early resolution. Somebody has made those decisions, right? And with respect to what I do in racial equality is to make sure in my role, when something comes across my desk, that those decisions are going to be made irrespective of race, social status, color, or creed, because I think we all know, we don't have to say, that our criminal justice system in its inception was not designed for us. It was designed for the oppression of us. And my role as a prosecutor is to make sure that I do not advance that ball. To the extent somebody's going to be prosecuted by me or my office, my goal is to make sure that every person who is similarly situated receives the exact same treatment as a prosecutor. So that's what I'll say.
Thank you so much, Angela. And thank you for the work that you do. We know it's so important to have, us in the room. So last but not least, Lanita.
Thank you for that question. And I'm going to draw on the words of, and you've probably heard it throughout this conference, but it's still, I have to draw on those words of the late Charles Hamilton Houston, in that a Black lawyer is either a social engineer or a parasite on society. And he went further to explain what a social engineer is. And it's for Black attorneys to use our specialized knowledge and training and understanding of the U.S. Constitution to make Black communities better. And so when we talk about racial equity and use in the law, I think we have to look not everyone's going to be your civil rights attorney. Not everyone is going to be in criminal justice, but what can you as an attorney do to make Black communities better? If you practice in business law, then can you to me, you have an obligation to either provide pro bono services or do legal clinics to Black business owners to make sure that they have their legal houses in order. It's not that you don't have to be out here in the streets or you know, fighting the police misconduct cases or getting everyone out of jail, but everyone has a role. If you do tax law, our Black people need serious training, and not training, but assistance with taxes and making sure that they're doing everything right, and learning that it's not beneficial to go claim Boo Boo and Pookie's and everybody else's kids just so that you can get a larger refund back, because the penalties that can come back from that are way worse than the amount of money you're going to get in that current year. So it's whatever area of legal practice you decide to go in, figuring out how you can use your training to make Black communities stronger and better.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that response. In talking about the many different avenues there are to advance racial equity in the law, I'm curious to know, why you all started where you started. So Attorney Baker, Attorney Taylor, why you decided to start in public defense, and then Attorney Adams, why you decided to start in private practice. And if we can go just in that reverse order, that'd be great. So we can start with you, Attorney Baker.
I wish I could say that I decided to go into public defense work, but I graduated from law school in 2006. If you guys have heard anything about the history of the legal profession, it was one of the first, I won't say first crash, but it was a big crash when I was graduating. And so for me, it was, I can't graduate from law school with these loans and not have a job. And the job that I got was at the public defender's office. Now, if I wasn't interested in criminal defense and public defender work, I probably never would have submitted my resume to go there. So I did have some interest in it. I stayed at the public defender's office for 2 years and then went into private criminal defense. I will say the training that I received at the public defender's office prepared me to be the lawyer that I still am today. To feel comfortable going before a judge, before a jury, before whoever, arguing with prosecutors, whatever I needed to do to adequately represent my clients, and to balance a large caseload. So being able to do that, I got those training wheels at the public defender's office. Not long after being in public defense work, I chose to become a prosecutor. Before I went into, and I did that because I realized from a defense perspective, many times, especially if my client was guilty of the charges in front of me and they had the evidence to prove that guilt, I was at the mercy of the prosecutor or a jury or a judge. I wanted to be the person that could grant the mercy that I felt needed to happen to balance the scales of justice. And so that's why I always get the question of why I became a prosecutor. And like Attorney Adams, I think it is imperative that we encourage Black attorneys not just to look at public defender roles, not just look at ACLU or legal defense fund, not just look at those roles, but seriously consider being prosecutors, because that is where you can administer justice. And that's where I prosecuted from an angle, okay, if I had what can I do to keep this person from coming back in? That cycle of recidivism that we know is real, what resources can I give? And so I encourage people to really do that. So I guess I answered the question about public defense, but I really wanted to go into why I chose to become a prosecutor after serving as a defense attorney.
Thank you so much, Attorney Baker. You beat me to it. So we can keep going. Attorney Taylor, Attorney Adams.
I'll go. So I came to law school knowing I was interested in criminal justice reform, writ large. And I actually spent my first summer at a prosecutor's office in New York City because I heard from so many, attorneys and professors that prosecutors had the real power in the system to help people. And very quickly in that summer, I came to understand that, that affirmative power was to incarcerate people or to not, and that line prosecutors don't have a lot of discretion. in those decisions. And like that wasn't, you know, that type of power I was interested in having personally, and the people that I came to law school to serve on the other side of the courtroom. And so after that summer, I did a 180 and tried to do everything in law school related to criminal defense so that a public defender office would have me my 2L summer. And luckily they did. And I've fallen in love with the work. I love my clients. I love the passionate advocacy and the creativity that goes into the work. And that's how I ended up as a public defender.
Thank you, Attorney Taylor. Attorney Adams.
So my first job was at a law firm, at a big law firm, Austin & Bird, and I wish I had a more scholarly or academic answer to give you, but it was because of the money. Like much like Ms. Baker, I came out around the same time that she did in law school, and you know, I went to Howard. Howard was my number one choice because I went to law school thinking that I was going to be the next Thurgood Marshall, thinking that I was going to be the next Charles Hamilton Houston. But I didn't really know what that looked like for me, right? So prior to me going to law school, I didn't have a lot of interaction with lawyers. I really didn't know any real lawyers like that. So I kind of just really didn't know what I was getting into. I was kind of flying the plane as I was building it, so to speak. So I go to law school thinking I'm gonna be just a martyr for justice. And then these firms come in and they offer me more money than I even knew was that firms were giving at the time. So I went there because I had school loans. I went there because I needed the money or wanted the money. And being there, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the system. I learned a lot about the role of lawyers. And I also, to be honest, I learned how to become a lawyer to a certain extent. I learned the importance of attention to detail. I learned the importance of always showing up as your best self. I had a partner tell me one time, we pay you for perfection. So although perfection can never really be achieved, I learned the benefit of getting as close as possible. So, but I knew it was something that I did not want to do for a long time. So I was there for 7 years, and I had a decision to make. Am I going to stay here and try to make partner, or am I going to really follow my dreams? So after I did that, I went to clerk for a judge. It was the best experience of my life. I clerked for Judge Clarence Cooper. He is such an awesome man. He is such an awesome judge, such an awesome arbiter of the law. And he was just Black, just real Black in everything that he did, and how he judged cases, and how he set down sentences. And so I really enjoyed that experience. And being a federal clerk, we saw the AUSAs come in all the time, right? I saw them present cases. I saw them have trials. And I was able to see, much like Ms. Taylor and much like Ms. Baker, that the power that they wielded or could wield in some regard. And I really wanted to do that. And so after I clerked, I decided to become an AUSA. Well, first I went to Main Justice. It was under Eric Holder's time as AG. I went to be a fraud prosecutor in DC under the criminal division, and I prosecuted healthcare fraud crimes, much of my time there. And then I came back to Atlanta, where I'm from, and I just became AUSA in the Atlanta office, doing, again, white collar type crimes. And Ms. Taylor said something that I thought was very key and very important. Ms. Taylor said during her time as the prosecutor's office, she learned that the line prosecutors did not have that much power per se, right? And she is absolutely right. Especially when you are coming in as like fresh out of law school or without much under your belt, it is hard to kind of get your way with becoming a prosecutor, especially as a Black prosecutor. So, what I will say that it is so important in this role, and I think Ms. Baker can probably speak to this too, to show up authentic and to show up assertive. Like if you have the ability to make your voice heard and to make your position known, people will eventually listen to you. So that's the only thing I want to say about that. But Ms. Taylor was dead on when she said that. And so it is important in this role to make sure that you are not at the table, but that you are speaking up at the table and pounding it if you need to. So.
Thank you for that as well. You all are just rolling on through where we're going. So this is beautiful. I do just want to get a little specific because I think all three of you mentioned, prosecution and needing to be in the room and in that space. And right now, there is a growing progressive prosecution movement. And there's also, arguments in support of that movement, and there's critiques of that movement. And so I'm curious to know, what are your thoughts on the assertions that prosecution cannot be progressive? What are your thoughts on people saying, the system is inherently biased, and so working within it is maybe not effective? What do you say to, and maybe you'll reiterate some of the same comments that you already made, but I just want to address it head on, since folks are deciding what they're going to be doing with their careers.
I can jump in on that. And I guess in saying it, because when I saw the question, that was my first time seeing the term progressive prosecution. But I absolutely do think that there is such a thing as progressive prosecution, and Ms. Taylor is correct in it. Line prosecutors typically don't have that voice. But if we're not starting out as prosecutors to move up within in that office, or to take or running for elected prosecutorial office, especially those are the ones who especially have those powers, then we're in essence letting the system as it stands stay that way. I always say I'm somewhere in between whether I think the whole system needs to be dismantled and rebuilt, or if it's truly a problem of the people who are in the roles of the position. And I say that in the people who are elected as prosecutors, the people who are working at prosecutors. I'm not going to sit here and say that every Black prosecutor is necessarily a progressive person or believes in progressive prosecution. We know some. I had to deal with Daniel Cameron here in Kentucky. So, enough said in his stance on what justice is. So I went from saying we need more Black prosecutors, which I do want more Black prosecutors, but I want more Black prosecutors who are really interested in making the justice system the way that it's supposed to work in terms of equality for all. So I'm not necessarily opposed to the people who say tear it down, rebuild it all the way back up. But even if we rebuild it all the way back up, if we don't have the right people in those roles, we're going to continue to see the same problems. So I think that we have to be willing to put ourselves in those positions. I worked for the elected prosecutor. When I interviewed, he told me, he said, my job was to do what I felt was the right thing to do, what I felt, not what he felt was the right thing, what I felt was the right thing to do. And the only thing they asked of me is if I ended up on TV for a decision I made, that I better have a good explanation of why I made that decision. And so I did what I always felt was the right thing to do. But if they ever came back, I was like, well, here's why I did it. And so it kind of, to what Attorney Adams said, if you're working towards perfection or just being genuine and really doing the right thing, so long as you can justify why you did it. And if you're in a space where they don't let you do what you feel is right, then like Ms. Taylor did, she's like, that wasn't the place for me. Don't sit in a place that will not let you be your authentic self. And I know that's easier said than done. I'm, what am I, 16 years out now? So it's easy for me to be like, deuces. And people think now they like, because I get a lot of comments, well, you were on Breonna Taylor case. Before I was on Breonna Taylor case, I had no problem being like, deuces, and following my heart, because it's the only way that our job's stressful enough. You can't do it where you're not able to be your authentic self.
I was just going to say, like Ms. Baker, when I saw the question was the first time that I too had heard of this term, progressive prosecution. And I went back and I read the article from The Atlantic that kind of explained what it was and talked about it. And my position is the notion that prosecution or the criminal justice system is inherently biased goes to the very core of our country, right? Everything that our country was built upon is inherently biased. So I am not familiar with the argument that progressive prosecution is not something we should do. I think the question is, what are the best methods to achieve it? Because if we do nothing, just like Ms. Baker said, that is the surest way not to achieve it. Right? Of course, I guess the argument can be we can't just dismantle the whole system and kind of work from there. But there has always been this contention between reformation and revolution, right? And we have always in our country's history, in my opinion, worked very hard at reforming systems. And especially in something like criminal justice, where crime is happening. It's going to happen. They're going to be victims of these crimes. And what we can't have just a lawless society where people are just running rampant, and it's whatever that movie is where they were able to like kill people for a day or whatever. Like that, like we don't want that in our actual society. So if there's going to be a criminal justice system, I believe that we should do everything that we can to make sure that our decisions are fair and just and equitable to everyone involved in the system. And if that is progressive prosecution, I think that we should certainly aim toward that, if that's what that means. But there's always going to be a contention on what is the best method to achieve it. And not only is there going to be a contention, but that conversation needs to keep happening, because as long as we're talking about it, as long as we're focused on it, to me, that means that we're doing something and not putting our head in the sand. So that's my position.
And yeah, I mean, to add to those statements, I agree that I think, especially in leadership positions, elected DA positions, policy changes and charging decisions, you know, can be made by progressive prosecutors. I mean, I would rather work with a progressive prosecutor than not. In my role, like any day, you know, I'd beg for it. But I mean, I also think that in our current criminal legal system, there is no way to do progressive prosecution, but you can prosecute more progressively. And that is an extremely worthwhile endeavor, because to Attorney Adams' point, the criminal legal system isn't going anywhere anytime soon. But I would also say that, you know, while crime happens in America, it happens all over the world. And the United States is, you know, one of the few countries that incarcerates people at the rate that we do. And so whether that is through extreme reform or from tearing it down and building back up, I think there's a lot of work to be done in that space. And so I think that the same people who can be progressive prosecutors can be progressive legislators to be changing, you know, mandatory minimums or other criminal laws, or progressive civil attorneys, such as, you know, what Ms. Baker is now, and things, or policy writers and things like that. And so I think that, you know, if someone is interested in, you know, prosecution as an entity, progressive prosecution is a worthwhile endeavor, but it is not the only way to change the system, and maybe is not the way to bring the wholesale change that we sorely need.
Thank you all so much for those rich responses. I think you touched on a lot of people's thoughts. I want to stick with you for a second, Attorney Taylor. So, you know, you graduated from Columbia Law School. It's been said that, you know, your alma mater, my current institution, Harvard, they steered students toward the private sector or even toward the prosecution. So I'm wondering, what, if any, support did you rely on in law school to forge and maintain your path toward public defense?
Yeah, sure. So I'm not going to lie and say like the idea of 205K and a guaranteed job after 2L wasn't appealing to me. Similarly to Attorney Adams, when I came to law school, I didn't even heard of big law. I didn't know it was an option. So it was quite a shock. In terms of staying on the path, I mean, the fact that Columbia has their own LRAP program, I think, is the main reason that, you know, I didn't waver. I knew that I wasn't going to have to, you know, depend on the goodwill of the federal government for my loans to get paid off eventually. And also, I think as I learned more about corporate law, that, you know, at the end of the day, work is work. And, you know, when the alarm goes off in the morning and I don't want to get up, being able to know that I'm going to work for, you know, a client that I like talk to every day is much more motivating for me personally than, you know, going to work at a big law firm. Like Attorney Adams said, they pay you for perfection, and that's a lot of perfection. And so I think keeping that top of mind, that, you know, they pay you like two attorneys, but they work you like two attorneys, was what kept me on the path I was more interested in. But I also will acknowledge that I have like a certain privilege in that. My parents aren't like particularly wealthy, but if my whole life fell apart, I can go sleep on their couch and they feed me. And that's not, you know, a privilege that every, you know, Black attorney has. And so that's something also that, you know, having that safety net also allowed me to stay on that path.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Attorney Taylor. Attorney Adams, you mentioned a little bit earlier about some of those same motivations that may steer folks into private sector. Attorney Baker, I haven't yet heard from you at all if finances has played a role in any of your career choices thus far, if you'd be comfortable sharing.
Yeah, when I left the working for the city, so I was with the city for almost 7 years, or 6 years. The first 5 years, I did that as a prosecutor. and then my last year, I moved to our civil side of our office where I did legislative services. So working for our city metro council or city government, drafting legislation for local ordinances. And yes, when I left to go into personal injury, I was like, I got to make some money. These student loans aren't going anywhere anytime soon. Like I probably have my student loan balance 16 years out, it's probably still going to be the same as some of you all's when you get out, because you pay and it goes nowhere, especially in public service. And mind you, we're just getting to where they're like, oh, well, now these loans qualify. So I'm working in the public sector for the majority of my career. And I'm like, oh, I don't have the right loans to even get the student loan forgiveness. What world do we live in? So when I went to public to do personal injury, yes, financial was a factor. Now, when I left personal injury and civil rights litigation just this recent November, it really was it was a mental health necessity for me. I don't think people like they see the glamour of what it is to represent a Breonna Taylor. But there's a lot of stressors that go on in the background. And so I actually took a pay cut to go in-house where I'm at. And not to say that I would not go back to personal injury litigation, civil rights litigation. It's just at the point of time that I was in with everything, with being president-elect, with, still continuing to represent, I still work with the family of Breonna Taylor to try to push for justice. We just met with the Department of Justice earlier this week. And so to do that, and then to have not a lot of Black attorneys in Louisville, Kentucky do civil rights. So to get every call of every person who felt their civil rights had been violated, it just took an extreme emotional toll on me at that point. And so the one thing I would tell everyone here is you have to, you can't adequately represent your clients if you're not taking care of yourself. So whatever you decide to do in this career path, put yourself and your personal health first. Like they said, the firm, I like Ms. Taylor saying that they pay you for two, they pay for 2 lawyers. They expect to work with 2 lawyers. By all means, if that's what you want to do it. But when you feel it taking a toll on yourself, make yourself a priority.
Can I just add something to that really quickly? I just have to underscore what Ms. Baker said. And I know that we're talking about in terms of racial equality and justice, but just for lawyers, young lawyers coming out, understand that there is no amount of money that pays for peace. You cannot put a price on peace. Just like Ms. Baker and Ms. Taylor said, when I went to the law firm, I was there for 7 years, but I knew it was something that I could not do. Ms. Taylor said that they will work you like 2 lawyers, and they absolutely will. And it came to a point for me where I recognized for my mental health, like Ms. Baker, that I had to do something else. And talking about financial motivations, at some point, finances will not matter. I took a $130,000 pay cut when I decided to go clerk for Judge Cooper. And I knew that I had to do that. And I will tell you that I felt the richest during that time that I had ever felt at the law firm, because the wealth came not from the money and the things, it came from the peace of mind. So I just wanted everybody to keep that in mind as they're making decisions, not just now, but going forward in their careers.
Thank you all again for just sharing on, what is sometimes considered a taboo topic, in, financial considerations that are really important. Attorney Adams, I want to stick with you for a second now. So you talked about making the transition from big law back into your clerkship in the public sector. Was that always your plan? Had you intended to stay at the law firm for 7 years? Had you intended to stay longer? And what was it like having to practically make that decision?
So I'll tell you, I know that I did not want to stay at the law firm forever, but I did not know what I wanted to do. I had no idea what my next step would be. And when I was at the law firm, I worked defending white collar criminals or people who had been accused or accompanied. So I worked within the white collar section of my law firm. And as a part of that work, I found myself across the table from a lot of AUSAs. And I think that kind of what we've mentioned here today is that I recognize that as a defense attorney, we was always responsive. We were always responding to the allegations, responding to the investigations. And being across the table from the AUSAs, I remember a moment at the firm being like, that is what I want to do. I want to be the person who's making the decision. So to answer your question, probably my 4th year out of law school, I went to interview at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Atlanta, and I did not get it. I was so upset. I made it all the way. This is when Sally Yates, who some of you may know or have heard of, was the U.S. Attorney at the time. And I remember, I think I was like number 2 or number 3, but I just did not make the cut, and I was devastated. So what I did was I looked at everyone who they hired during that time period, like 8 hires, and all of them had federal clerkships. So I had remembered that, and I made a point to always try to get one if anything came up, to try to get a federal clerkship. And that is how I end up going into my federal clerkship, because I felt like, even though it's not really true, but I just felt like from the people they were hiring, that was a credential that they had that I did not. So that's why I decided to leave the law firm, because I wanted to be intentional about what I wanted to do next and not just run to something else. I think a lot of times once you start practicing law and once you get into the field, there's a point where you will not like there may become a point where you will not like what you're doing. And it is important, I think, to make sure that you are intentional about the next step and not just run away to anything because you are so uncomfortable within that space. So that's why I decided. So I stayed a little longer than I wanted to, but I really wanted to get that federal clerkship. So.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that insight. Okay, I'm coming back to you, Attorney Taylor. So Attorney Adams just mentioned, expectations when you go into your first job out of law school and how things may or may not be as you expected. Can you talk to us a little bit about, now that I think it's been about a year or so or less that you've been at the Public Defender's Office in Portland, Oregon? What's it been like for you?
Oh, I mean, it's been a whirlwind. I've actually only been at the office since September. And I think that I've learned a lot about federal defense in particular. All of my externships and things in law school were at state defender offices. And so learning about like the sentencing guidelines and dealing with the Federal Bureau of Prisons has all been eye-opening in the worst possible ways. And it's been good though. I think that I felt really lucky in that, doing a lot of externships and things in law school. I felt prepared for the more logistical parts of being a lawyer that I think sometimes aren't focused on in law school, like setting up client calls and having effective client meetings and sending like 1,000 professional emails a day, and things of that nature. That like there's so much in being a lawyer who's defended outside of Westlaw and Lexis. And so I think in all of that, I've learned a lot. And it's been great. I mean, I think especially doing public defense during COVID has been extremely difficult in terms of having your clients only on Zoom when like having like an in-person communication can be so important. And things like that have been difficult. So I'm excited for the pandemic to be over so I can go back to, in-person jail visits. But that's how it's been so far. So.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
I was just going to joke with Ms. Taylor from my public defender days. The fact that you're excited about going back to in-person jail visits lets me know that you truly love your job, because I hated jail visits. So
it's, when you're halfway through talking with someone and the phone cuts off because they only have 10 minutes to talk, and like getting another legal call is going to take 3 days. You just wish you could just be in the room sometimes.
Thank you for that, Attorney Taylor. Now I'm coming back to you, Attorney Baker, before I ask another panel-wide question. I want to know, how did you come into representing Breonna Taylor's family? And I have a follow-up question, but I'll let you first address that one, or I can pose them both to you now.
All right, either way.
Okay, so I'll pose the second one. So, people have said, and sometimes I believe it to be true, that true justice in these cases is the person who was taken away from us being alive. So I want to know what your thoughts are on that statement. And also considering that, how do you determine how much to ask for in damages when it's impossible to put a price on human life?
Thank you for both of those questions. So Breonna Taylor's case, her family actually reached out to me the day after she was killed. So she was killed Friday, March 13th. I remember it being Friday the 13th because we were just starting COVID. So a lot of people always it's not just that I remember it from paperwork. We had just been sent, that was my first day working from home due to COVID at the beginning of the pandemic. And so I remember watching the news on that Friday and seeing a story saying that a police officer had been shot, one suspect dead, one suspect was in custody. Didn't think twice about it. That was the blurb. You didn't see anything. It just said it was doing the execution of a search warrant. The next morning, I received a phone call from Sam Aguiar, who owns the firm that I worked at the time. And he was saying, hey, the family, the young lady that was killed the day before had reached out. He was in Florida, so he needed for me to meet with them. And so I set up a meeting with them that following Monday. They reached out because I had done quite a few, quite a few civil rights cases that got a lot of profile locally. Of course, Breonna Taylor was my first national high profile case. But as I said before, there's not any other Black attorneys in this city doing civil rights law. So I had, at that time, I had 4 other civil rights cases, 2 of which gained significant attention on the local level. So that's why her family had reached out to our firm. I took the case because once I met with the family and heard, more about Breonna, learned about the officers that were involved. One thing that Attorney Adams and Attorney Taylor will tell you, when you work in the criminal justice system, you know which officers are dirty and you know which ones are legit. And when I heard some of the names, I immediately knew that something went wrong and something something happened that was not supposed to happen. At that time, I still didn't I told them that I would be willing to investigate, but didn't make a commitment. When I made the commitment was when I went with an investigator to Breonna's apartment, and I walked into that apartment and I saw what looked like a war zone, and knowing that, her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, had only fired 1 shot. When I saw the amount of gunfire that went through her apartment, where the gunfire was, it barely missed a furnace, a furnace pipe. And I'm just like, they literally could have blown up this entire apartment building. That's when I knew that I had to get involved and find out what happened. I had the luxury that for 2 months, the world didn't know about Breonna Taylor. Even in the city, they knew that someone had gotten killed, but they maybe didn't know, the extent. They didn't know her name. But her family, Breonna's family, was always posting on social media saying, justice for Breonna Taylor, Shaun King shared one of their posts and it went viral. And then my friend Benjamin Crump, who is a past president of the National Bar Association, I met him through the National Bar Association. That's who, when I was chief of communications, it was when he was president. So we're really good friends. He called and he was like, hey, I'm seeing something about this Breonna Taylor. Do you know anything about it? And I was like, yes, it's my case. Don't you come in here? No, but no, I say, it's my case. I talked to him a little bit about it. I didn't ask him about coming onto the case right away because it wasn't my decision to do that. But in my head, I was like, it wouldn't be bad maybe to bring him in because I was getting no movement from the city. We were getting stonewalled with things. We had already filed our lawsuit. And we filed our lawsuit early so that we could get discovery, meaning find out some stuff that we're not getting able to get through open records requests. When I hung up with him, I immediately called Sam and said, Sam, what do you think about bringing Ben in? And he was like, I think that'd be great. And then he's like, let's talk to Tamika, who is Breonna's mother. So I talked to Tamika. She wanted time to think about it because when I talked to her, I let her know if we bring him in, this has the potential to go nationwide. You and your family come under a microscope at that time. So she had to think about it. She talked to her family to get their input. She called back and said, she's like, I would like to bring him in. So I called Ben back a few days later, said, hey, Ben, da, da, da. So then he gets involved. We do a press conference saying he's involved, a virtual press conference because we were still on lockdown. That was mid-May. He was going to be the media person But then 2 weeks after he became involved in our case is when George Floyd was murdered. And so I quickly learned, and he got pulled into George Floyd's case. So I quickly learned that media didn't want to talk to the same person for 2 different cases. So he was talking on George Floyd and I was talking on Breonna Taylor. And I do think people always ask, I don't know that, like, we had gotten some national attention before George Floyd was murdered, but I seriously don't think, if it was not I say trifecta, but really it was all 4 things. It was Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and the pandemic, because everybody was sitting at home watching TV and had nothing to do. And so it's like, what's going on? So that's kind of how it came and went. In terms of justice, you're absolutely correct. Breonna's mom could care less about how much the financial settlement was. She could care less that it was one of the largest in the country at the time for an individual case. She would much rather have Breonna in her life, but also understanding that's why we negotiated part of the police reform. To my knowledge, prior to Breonna's case, that had not been done with any other prior civil rights cases. But it was like, she was like, she's like, I don't even want to talk money if they're not going to, talk about changing the way that they do things so that this doesn't happen to anyone else. And sometimes if you hear Breonna's mama interviews now, and she says, I have another Breonna in Janiyah. She has a 21-year-old daughter so in her eyes, anything that she does and continues to promote for change and reform, it's so that her daughter isn't for some reason caught in the same type of fate that Breonna was caught into. But to value, so in any personal injury case, so the way you come to value a life, unfortunately, it is a science in the legal profession. We had economists, what are her loss of future earnings? You combine the loss of future earnings, you try to quantify the pain and suffering, and each state it's going to be different of what you can get. In Kentucky, since Breonna didn't have any minor children, she didn't have any children, there's no loss of consortium claim here. So we don't have loss of consortium. Our damages are limited to pain and suffering, Breonna's conscious pain and suffering. So we had to try to figure out how long did she actually live from the first time that she was shot, or is it pain and suffering from the time that they bust in her door? So the time from how long did she actually experience the pain and suffering that she endured? And so that's one thing. It was a loss of future earnings, and those were our elements of damages. So we said our initial offer, I will tell you in terms of this, our initial demand, they came up way more than we came down. So when we put a number out there, we had the numbers to back up what number we put out there in terms of our demand. So when we came to the 12 million, it wasn't much different than where they started. Prior to Breonna, in terms of a police shooting case in Kentucky, the largest settlement had been $3 million. So we increased that by 9 million. The largest civil rights settlement in Kentucky was for wrongful imprisonment. And one thing you guys will learn if you go into civil rights litigation is wrongful imprisonment, wrongful convictions are valued higher than wrongful death cases because the person is actually in prison for however many years they're there. If someone's in prison for 20 years, their claim's going to be larger than someone who may have been shot and lived for a few minutes after they were shot. So the largest settlement in civil rights settlement period for an individual was 8 million in Louisville, and it was for someone who had been wrongfully incarcerated. So we really did raise the bar in Louisville. So now that when you see these type of cases, that's one thing that we can say is like, we're not at that $3 million bar now, like we're at the 12 million when police take a life here. And so I think when cities are looking at that, they're really going to push their police departments to do things right, because they don't have that type of, most cities are self-insured. Like there's a little bit of insurance money there, but it's not like when we get in a car wreck and our car insurance is paying it and it's not coming out of our pocket. A lot of those settlements are coming from the actual city.
Thank you for that insight. I was really curious about the calculations and just like what goes into that. So I figured it was a science, but it was interesting to hear the insight. I have 2 more questions for y'all. If we could try to do like a lightning round answers, if possible, but these are not really lightning round questions. So this is a difficult ask. So you all touched on a bit of the personal responsibility that you feel in advancing racial equity. And you also touched on, choosing your peace at times, depending on the job that you're in. So I am curious if ever, even the job of advancing racial equity, I mean, being invited to speak on DE&I panels, having to mentor younger folks who you want to pull up. Does it ever feel like a burden? Is there ever a time when you're just like, I need to step away? Can you just talk about how you navigate that pull to do the work, but also to take care of yourself? And I want to start with Attorney Taylor, and then we'll go Adams, and then Attorney Baker.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you said, I think I do feel that responsibility. I'm a firm believer of like, to whom much is given, much is expected. And, everything that I have is due to my family and my community and people who paved the way for me to be in this profession, like Attorney Adams and Attorney Baker came before me. And I mean, I think since my legal career is quite young, I don't think I felt the full brunt of, the burden yet. Like, this is the first panel I've ever been asked to speak on. But so I expect that it might become too much in the future. And I think, in terms of doing that same thing in law school and like, mentoring undergraduate students who are interested in law school and doing pro bono work in law school, I think you'd have to, come up with your own limits of what self-care or what personal things you want and not letting go of those. And when the other responsibilities you have encroach on that, and that's when you say no. So I think having like firm boundaries on that is what I hope to do in the future, but I can't say that I've successfully done it so far.
That is a very good question. What I will say is that no matter what you decide to do, there are going to be times when it becomes really, really hard. There are going to be times in your career when it gets hard. And like Ms. Taylor said, self-care becomes critically important in those moments. As a prosecutor, I'm sure Ms. Taylor and Ms. Baker can speak on this. We are encountering people at the worst times in their lives, right? There are certain jobs you have when you are encountering society at their best, and there are jobs you're encountering them at their worst. Whether it is somebody who has been committing crimes and now they're being prosecuted, you're dealing with them, their families. And then a lot of times you have victims as well, right? So sometimes it can become very heavy when you are of the community, you are in the community, you share their lived experiences, and you are trying to decide and mitigate decisions on both sides of the aisle. It becomes hard. And so what I have done in those moments are just to check out. Sometimes you just have to put a pin in and say, you know what, I'm going on vacation for a week and don't call me. Nothing's going to burn. Nobody is going to die if I'm off the grid for a week. And that to me has become critically important. But I hesitate to say that it is a burden. To be honest with you, I feel like it's an honor to be fair. I feel like it is an honor to sit in the seats that we sit in and the seats that you guys will sit in very, very shortly, because everything that we've talked about today says that we are uniquely equipped to advance society and racial equity in this unique way. And so I honestly consider it an honor. And I will tell you that at times I have considered leaving my job or just doing something else. And that's not to say that I won't at some point in time, but Ms. Baker, she stated that every prosecutor is not going to be a progressive prosecutor, right? And so in this moment, when you think about leaving, there is something in my mind that says, I don't know who's going to fill this seat when I leave. And Attorney I know Adams, what my goal is.
I'm so sorry. I just got a message that says we will have to wrap this panel. To begin the next panel. I was going to let us, keep going, but there's another one. So I think we can push for a couple of more minutes. I just got another note. So
I'm going to let Ms. Baker speak.
Okay. And I'm so sorry. I did not want to cut you off. I just wanted to, I didn't know if we were going to get kicked off.
No problem. And I don't have to make my response long because I echo every single thing that Ms. Adams and Ms. Taylor said. It's not a burden, but it does become hard. And sometimes I think that the only thing that I would ask at times from our community is to be more understanding that we need that grace as well. And sometimes we do have to take space and time for ourselves. And we can't go 100 balls to the wall all the time. So it's not a burden at all. It's an honor and a privilege. But yeah.
And thank you. Since we've been given the permission to go over just a couple of minutes, I'm just going to throw the last question out there, end on a high note. Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, how does this moment make you feel as Black women in 2022? And anyone can start.
I say it's long overdue, but when I say never, ever have I been more proud to be a Black female attorney. So Black girl magic all day long.
I absolutely agree with everything Ms. Baker just said.
Same. Proud of amazing Black woman, proud of a former federal public defender, just all vibes, all happiness.
Beautiful. Thank you all. Thank you, Attorney Taylor. Thank you, Attorney Baker. Thank you, Attorney Adams, for this rich conversation. And thank you, NABALSA, for putting it on. And I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you.